Why are people obsessed with apocalypses, Justin?
I think it's the possibility of starting anew, that everything is wiped away.
The end of the world is just the beginning, and that's how every movie that is about things and drastic change start. There always has to be survivors, there always has to be what comes next, and I think we as people love that idea of like, okay, now what? It's just such a great story starter.
Michael Bay's Armageddon comes at the end of the 20th century and is one of a series of these big blockbuster disaster movies, and it may be one of the biggest, being the highest grossing film of 1998. Armageddon is also kind of all of Hollywood coming together trying to write a disaster movie. It had writers like J.J. Abrams and Tony Gilroy and even Robert Towne do a pass on the script.
Armageddon has its own set of Michael Bay, director, Jerry Bruckheimer, the producer, rules, okay? There has to be a ticking clock. In this case, it's 18 days before the world blows up. New York City is the target for all of these movies. You have to have the head of the Statue of Liberty falling down, or in this case, you have the spire of the Chrysler Building has to come down. And there is a hilarious moment where there has to be some sort of tender sex scene, but it's almost as if the people who make the movie don't really know how to shoot or why we should care about a sex scene.
You don't have feelings, you have song cues where Aerosmith shows up screaming on the soundtrack, and you have Ben Affleck eating animal crackers off of Liv Tyler's chest and midriff, which is one of the worst scenes in the history of American cinema.
It's one of those movies that I think definitely relies on the charisma of its cast to sell just an absurd premise. One of the things I always love about Michael Bay movies, though, is that he always packs it with terrific character actors. You've got great turns from Steve Buscemi and Billy Bob Thornton, and they're just selling Michael Bay's particular insanity so well.
Is this going to hit us?
We're efforting that as we speak, sir.
What kind of damage are we?
Damage? Total, sir.
I think this movie has the distinction of being the asteroid movie to end all asteroid movies, because Michael Bay just had no concern about reality. Every single wild spectacle he can put in this movie, he puts in this movie.
In terms of cinephilia, the end of days were kind of spelled out when Armageddon made the Criterion Collection. This was a very lauded, very critically acclaimed collection of films. You had films from Fellini and Bergman, and then Michael Bay. But I think it really speaks to the fact that Armageddon was in a class of its own as an apocalyptic film.
Blade Runner is a film that a lot of people don't consider apocalyptic, but what you learn about the Earth kind of reveals that it's not a great place. Plants and animals don't really thrive. Every animal you see is a replicant of a sort.
The world of Blade Runner is kind of a futuristic LA, and one of, I think, the most interesting things that you see right off the bat is in the slow push-ins over this futuristic cyberpunk aesthetic city, you actually see kind of flashes of flame that are dredging up fossil fuels from the depths underneath the city.
I love that a 1982 film is looking at 2019 and kind of thinking, you know, what would be around us? We have flying cars, we would have replicants, and we would have these huge corporations still in control. Some would last until today, others would pretty immediately fail in the 1980s. But I love the idea that it's Sid Mead and Ridley Scott realizing that in 2019, brands and corporations would still be in control.
Blade Runner's horror is about the idea that what if the resources we're exploiting are people, are real, are living beings?
Commerce is our goal here at Tyrell. More human than human is our motto. Rachel is an experiment, nothing more.
The apocalypse of Blade Runner is really a much more intimate thing. Are humans going to exist? The aesthetic exhibits this fear of immigration, a fear of people taking people's jobs and people's place, when the story is about a fear of people being taken over by machines. The aesthetic is kind of banging on the fear you have of this moment, but what if that fear in the future looks like you can't even tell whether you belong here anymore?
Cherry 2000 presents a really unique post-apocalyptic world. It's one where city life is essentially controlled by commerce and technology. You have Sam, whose wife, Cherry, is an android, and he's completely fine with that because the dating scene, especially when it comes to human beings, has gotten really complicated in this world.
Can you fix her?
I'm sorry, kid. Total internal meltdown. They don't come any finer than this.
At first glance, Cherry 2000 seems just like a campy 80s sci-fi action drama. And it is, but it deals with a life event that we all have to go through. Within the film, society has collapsed in many ways, but the narrative is so lensed in on a personal story of dissolution and reintegration.
There are just so many little pleasures in it. The leads are incredibly attractive. It also just has this great kind of desert landscape, and at one point it goes to Las Vegas, which is just in complete ruins. It has so much fun, and it really is just infectious.
Cherry 2000 is a movie that is very hard to describe. Producer Ed Pressman talked about how it's kind of like The Road Warrior, but it's got this like new wave sensibility, but we've also got Melanie Griffith. It's all super funky and she's a bounty hunter. Come see it, it's really good. People did not go see it, but more people should see it because it is wild and fun and wacky and full of these incredible car stunts. If you like car stunts, this is a movie for you.
What makes Dr. Strangelove so good is it seems like prescient satire, like it just kind of tells you to embrace this potential apocalypse. It's kind of showing what we, in our hearts, worry is true, that all it takes is somebody's ego or idiocy to make the apocalypse happen.
A lot of the reason why Dr. Strangelove is so uncomfortable is the fact that as a normal, everyday person, you kind of trust that people in positions of authority know what they're doing. What if the people in charge aren't really as smart as we hope that they are?
Dr. Strangelove is relaying the idea that all of these semi-fictionalized governmental heads are all speaking the same language and are having the same dangerous approach to the end of the world. Even though it is obviously very aggressively a satire, it still feels kind of plausible that this could be going through these people's heads.
War is too important to be left to politicians. They have neither the time, the training, nor the inclination for strategic thought.
I think my favorite apocalyptic detail in it is that as the sort of American brain trust is being seduced into this idea of underground bunkers by the German scientist Dr. Strangelove, they're basically being sold a version of prehistoric civilization. You're going to stay underground and there's going to be a ratio of 10 women to every man. And instead of being horrified, they're like, yeah, let's do it, you know?
Regrettably, yes. But it is, you know, a sacrifice required for the future of the human race.
I must confess, you have an astonishingly good idea there, Doctor.
Thank you, sir.
The book that they base the film on is actually a really serious book. It's a really serious book about war and the Cold War specifically, but Kubrick, in his infinite wisdom, is able to tap into a type of very, very dark comedy while being very broad, though, in its execution of the ludicrous nature of war.
When John Carpenter started the screenplay for Escape from New York, it was the mid-1970s, and this was a period when New York City was effectively bankrupt, and you can tell that that's what was inspiring to John Carpenter. The Los Angeles in Escape from LA is a little more freaky, a little more circus, and that's kind of appropriate when you think about the differences between New York City and Los Angeles.
Everyone who fears what happens in an American city can feel really gleeful that the American cities have become the prisons where all the criminals go in and they don't come out. Until our hero, Snake, played by Kurt Russell, in the same outfit. He has to go in and save somebody in each film.
You go in, find the president, bring him out in 24 hours, and you're a free man.
24 hours, huh?
John Carpenter brings something out in Kurt Russell that no other filmmaker ever did, which was just his sense of play. You can feel how much fun Kurt Russell is having in this movie, even if I think he never actually smiles.
What's really interesting about Escape from LA and Escape from New York is the ways that we show how society has still banded together to survive. They thrive in their own ecosystem that they had to recreate after everything was taken away from them, and still have entertainment and leisure, but violence all intertwined into that.
Escape from New York is a lot of silly fun. It is a perfect summer blockbuster with all of the classic action movie tropes that you want. As for its sequel, I think it was oddly more prescient than we perhaps thought about when it first came out, the idea of a theocracy dominating the US. Who'd have thunk it? Ultimately, I think Snake Plissken has earned himself a spot in the Action Hero Hall of Fame, and that he rolls with the punches, he's looking out for himself, he does what needs to be done, and he's the guy you want to root for. He's the guy working class America will always want to root for.
Writer Arch Oboler was kind of the big idea man of the stage and radio, so it makes sense that he'd be the first filmmaker to make a movie about the nuclear apocalypse. As a film from 1951, Five is a nuclear apocalypse that is deeply in the shadow of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Five opens with a lot of recognizable destruction. They're using stock footage from the Bikini Atoll nuclear tests. It's a real invested interest in the precipice of nuclear destruction.
What changes in the 1940s is the understanding that humanity has reached a point where we can blow up the world at any moment. The invention of nuclear weapons is really a turning point in how humanity understands itself, how it conceptualizes itself, and how it worries about the eventual end of people.
I hardly think this is the time for nostalgic sentimentality. I've been giving a great deal of thought to why we are alive.
The rise of the nuclear era was both one of terror and one of optimism. Now, the 50s, people understood the power of radiation, but there was this optimism that we could harness it and use it for good. One of the things I love about this movie is that it really has this tongue-in-cheek attitude towards this optimism. There's a moment when they go into a grocery store and they're raiding it for supplies, and there's this cheeky little box of soap called Atomic Suds, just like, you know, this was supposed to be the way we sell things, as atomic equals the future.
It's also considered one of the first true American indie films. The crew was made up of majority USC students, and the film was shot around writer, director, and producer Arch Oboler's Malibu Hills home. Arch Oboler was a master manipulator of whatever medium he was working with. And with Five, we see him working with a super small budget, only 5 actors, and he's able to mine all the tension and atmosphere out of so little.
Gas is a satirical comedy from Roger Corman about a world where a military gas was unleashed and killed everyone over the age of 25. One thing Gas has is a great bunch of actors who are kind of just about to be famous. People like Bud Cort, Cindy Williams, and Talia Shire all make pretty early performances here. Even though Roger Corman made movies for boomers and hippies, he himself was always kind of conservative. So Gas is really his chance to poke fun at the hippie movement.
Hi, we know who you are.
Who am I?
Don't get metaphysical. You're the filthy trash who tear up and down the fairways, crazy with dope smoke and cheap wine.
Gas looks at what would happen if hippies inherited the earth, and it's pretty much utter chaos. I hate the fact that in this film, it basically says anyone over the age of 25 is old. But that's very much part of the youth and counterculture of the early 1970s.
This is the exploitation movie to end all exploitation movies. It's got dune buggies, it's got murder, it's got hippies, it's got drugs, it's got interracial marriage, but it's also very much an end of a 60s sort of movie. You can catch that feeling that Times are changing. There is still a bit of that optimism of the hippies of like, love will save us all.
Gas comes at a pretty pivotal time in American filmmaking. It's really just the cusp of new Hollywood, and it's driven by the same American disillusionment surrounding the Vietnam War that a lot of new Hollywood films are driven by. The film is largely played as a comedy, but it actually is a very earnest retelling of the kind of anxieties that Americans were facing at the time.
The world of the Hunger Games imagines a future where corporate interests have kind of run amok and humanity is split into different districts that all have kind of their own industries. It's a really interesting way to introduce labor politics to kind of a viewing public that's maybe not ready for the college courses on wealth and the ownership of the means of production, but is there to see Jennifer Lawrence kick ass and take names.
Katniss isn't just the person leading the revolution, she's a symbol. They all have reasons to inspire revolution and to want to be part of this revolution, but she's kind of being forced into taking on this persona that's so much bigger than her and so much more important, and there's so much resting on her shoulders.
I volunteer as tribute. I believe we have a volunteer. Mr. Mayor? I need to get out of here. You need to get out of here. No.
The Hunger Games started to bring on some pretty big ideas, and something that Suzanne Collins was very obsessed with was the origins of war, what creates war, and what can end it.
Suzanne Collins really set out not to write an adolescent novel, but to write a novel about the politics of societal decline for adolescents. The interesting thing about the Hunger Games is that as an apocalyptic metaphor for society, you can read a lot into it. Who does the Capitol represent? Are they the left? Are they the right? Are they the rich? Are they the poor? Are they the West? Who are they? Think about society and how it works. For a bunch of 14-year-olds, that's kind of the message you need to give them.
The original Invasion of the Body Snatchers was released in 1956, so which was, the dead center of the Eisenhower years, the beginning of the Cold War, and just after the horrendous effects of McCarthyism in the United States. The movie deals with an invasion from another planet of basically alien seeds, and when they come alive as the people that they have basically snatched. They're like automatons, they're robots, there are absolute avatars of conformity.
You had just become aware of a curious, unexplainable epidemic mass hysteria. Men, women, and children suddenly convinced themselves that their relatives weren't their relatives at all.
The Invasion of the Body Snatchers movies are all inspired by a Jack Finney novel, but all of them take their own liberties with it. The concept, I think, will always work on a human level. Are you afraid of being the only person left? Everyone else is replaced, and you just don't fit in anymore.
Be it the fear of communists during the Cold War or the Watergate scandal, it's a narrative that always centers around paranoia and the idea that fellow human beings might not be what they say they are.
The 1956 Invasion of the Body Snatchers is simply one of the most important American movies ever made. You ask yourself, is this a satire of 1950s communist paranoia, or is it simply an enactment of that paranoia? What the 70s version has is it has a much more human and humane kind of cast. In Philip Kaufman's version, he casts the most charismatic, strange, funky actors like Jeff Goldblum and Veronica Cartwright, even Leonard Nimoy. These are characters whose humanity is so vibrant that you really don't want to see the characters taken over.
It's the rare science fiction movie that ends like really with no hope for humanity. Like it ends with the idea that the story is not over and things have not been resolved and that these aliens are coming for you. And as iconic as the final scene in the 50s film, I think Kaufman completely outdoes it with the incredible moment where Donald Sutherland just points at the camera and screams that horrific, like, "Ah!"
Judge Dredd started as a comic character in the 1970s. The inspiration for Judge Dredd was essentially a more extreme version of Dirty Harry, and they decided that that had to exist in a sort of apocalyptic future. It has a lot of predictions about populism, about mass surveillance, and about a lot of the fear-mongering in the 1980s about crime. You also see a massive level of unemployment because automation has essentially taken all the jobs.
Sir, Peachtree's houses 75,000 registered citizens. It has the highest crime rate in Sector 13, unemployment rate of 96%, and more than half the residential levels here are classed as slums.
I think Dredd overall is a much more truer depiction of Judge Dredd and the iconic sort of crypto-fascist authority that he represents. It's a very terrifying look at the future, but it's also very, very fun in its portrayal of this dystopian future of America known as Mega City 1.
Our arch villain in Dredd is Mama. She has developed a new drug that is hitting the streets and destroying lives. It's a drug called slow-mo. These effects are really beautiful. A lot of them look like an underwater ballet, and it imparts a kind of artistry to Dredd. The drug addiction aspect to Dredd, I think, is really important on its take of the apocalypse. This is a drug that could destroy humanity. It's something that's also very relatable in today's drug crisis with opioids.
The thing that both Judge Dredd films do pretty well is show the world after the apocalypse has happened and is still absolutely miserable, even though that technology seems to be at a level where it could make people comfortable. The future will be miserable because it will hold all of the same issues that we have today.
What I think is really successful about the Dredd movies is the apocalypse that's shown here isn't something catastrophic happened. It isn't there is an insurgent entity that is going to take away what we have built because we weren't strong enough. It is that we weren't strong enough in our conception of what we can be, and that fragility is just on full display.
Knowing is a really fascinating vision of the apocalypse because it's a rare time that a big Hollywood movie is willing to tackle the religious apocalypse. It's all about a man who kind of loses his religion because his wife dies. He thinks everything has no point, but then he starts to see these patterns and starts to kind of see God in the patterns in spite of the fact that apparently God is very wrathful and going to destroy the entire earth.
I've matched these numbers to the dates of every major global disaster for the last 50 years in perfect sequence, except for 3. And these events haven't occurred yet, starting with this one. So tomorrow, somewhere on the planet, this number string predicts that 81 people are gonna die in some kind of tragedy.
Whoa. I mean, have a listen to yourself.
I know.
The filmmaker Alex Proyas actually has an interesting track record with dystopia. You know, The Crow is not literally set after the end of the world, but it has that doomy, apocalyptic graphic novel vibe that you would find in a movie like Blade Runner. So he's a good fit to make Knowing. And Nicolas Cage is a good lead actor for a movie like Knowing because when Nicolas Cage needs to know something, you need to know it too.
It's the end of the world, and Nick Cage has some predictions about how that's all going down. And this film is going to explore all of those predictions. This film also captures a lot of the anxieties of going down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. If there's one thing Nick Cage is good at, it's being a hysterical madman, and he nails it in this. Knowing is a deep cut for Nicolas Cage fans. You're going to get a lot out of this film.
Knowing is one of the more bizarre entries to the disaster film canon. It's one where the disaster is not averted, which I think is a rarity. In a quite eccentric twist, we kind of realize that the society is starting all over again in a very biblical way.
I saw Knowing at the tender age of 12, and it's been burned into my brain ever since, thanks to the multiple jaw-dropping sequences of utter destruction on a massive scale. A lot of apocalypse-based films are either pre- or post-catastrophe. It's very rare that we get to see the full Monty of a tsunami of fire wipe out New York City and then engulf the entire globe.
Don McKellar's Last Night is an apocalyptic film set in Toronto. There is no stated cause for the apocalypse. It's just sort of understood. McKellar found a way into it that was much more low-key and mundane, and which I think endures as one of the better English-Canadian films of its period.
The thing that drew me to Last Night first is that it's set in my hometown. One of the things that we do here as Canadians in general, we often feign politeness. And when it's the end of the world, are you going to keep doing that? And that's the thing that keeps coming up in the film, where people want to say something that might be considered rude or inappropriate, and they apologize.
It's such a Canadian film, and it actually came out the same year as Armageddon, and I think you really see the difference in apocalypses. Nobody in Last Night is trying to save the world. Nobody's trying to stop the end of the world. It's just kind of happening, and we know we have no control.
You could say that Last Night depicts a, relatively speaking, genteel apocalypse. At the core of the film is a romance, a budding romance, a brand new romance. It begins only as the world starts to end, which brings us to this big question: what does it mean to love when that love is going to be snuffed out in a short amount of time?
But what I do find sad and what I do find pathetic is people who don't know themselves, or people who don't like themselves, and as soon as they hear that the world is ending, they rush out and try and hook up with someone like it was closing time at Studio 54.
Well, I guess I'm not the one to talk to.
Viewing the apocalypse as just kind of an arbitrary end date allows for people to act on their fantasies a lot more, and it makes everyone a little bit aware of the present moment. So in that way, the apocalypse film, as Don McKellar sees it, is just an opportunity for change.
What makes Last Night different from so many other end-of-the-world movies is the fact that everybody already knows the end of the world is coming. The panic is gone, everybody's made their peace, and I think that makes it simultaneously joyous and sad and extremely punk rock. Even though this is sad and people don't get to see each other again, everybody is just putting on this big F you to the world, and everybody is just being exactly who they want to be and what they want to be at the end.
Mad Max is kind of a distinctly Australian apocalypse because so much of it is about space. The environment is such a harsh, oppressive factor, that Australian desert, the endless sands, the lack of water. It's a fantastic aesthetic and a fantastic feeling that's really captured on screen throughout all of the Mad Max films, but definitely more so the more recent entries.
The original Mad Max movie, and of course this is a movie that introduced Mel Gibson to the world. The first movie actually takes place a few years before what would be a nuclear war. The second film, The Road Warrior, which came out in 1981, also takes place before the nuclear war. And of course, the fourth installment, Fury Road, very much suggests that this is a post-apocalyptic environment.
Rather than just a straight sort of nuclear apocalypse, Mad Max has this interesting slow creep across the series. First, you see sort of crime run rampant, then you see gas running out, and eventually it's to the point where there's not even any water.
You don't have to do it just because he tells you. What choice does she have?
He's not gonna hurt us. He needs us.
Why?
To bargain.
Mad Max is a world where resources are important, and one of the most important resources for the villain, Immortan Joe, is his breeders, his women. And the thing that the film does so intelligently is it takes these people who are objectified into resources and it gives them so much agency. Every single woman in that film has a personality, a drive, a reason to exist, and they all get to be something other than a resource.
If I had to pick one apocalyptic film to watch forever, it would be Mad Max Fury Road. This is an apocalyptic film that sees hope in the matriarchy. This was edited by George Miller's wife, Margaret Sixel. When George Miller asked her, he said that he knew that he needed a woman because he wanted to be feminist and he wanted to be from a female perspective. He wanted to see this kind of risk to female lives and sexual violence from her perspective, and I think it's what makes Fury Road so singular and so unique. Night of the Comet is a really meta movie. It's a film that starts out in a movie theater in a projection booth and then kind of takes us on this journey. The director Thomas Eberhardt asked a group of teenage girls how they would spend their days if no one else was on Earth, and their answer was shopping and boys.
I love how your main characters of the film are saved literally by being inside a projection booth of a movie theater. I think that's such a wonderful love letter to the restorative, beautiful, life-saving qualities of being in a movie theater.
Night of the Comet is really irreverent. It's famous for its sense of humor, and it joins a kind of an emerging tradition in the late 80s and 90s of characters refusing to take very serious situations seriously just because other people tell them they should.
Do you have your MasterCard on you? No. Good, because you don't need it. The stores are open!
Night of the Comet is by far my favorite apocalyptic film of all time, because it dares to say that at the end of the world, we're probably still gonna wanna go shopping. This film is not afraid to use femininity. She's seemingly like a bimbo archetype, but she's actually extremely capable.
One of the neat things the film is thinking about is the way that capitalism survives the apocalypse. There is a way that the kids in the movie still pursue the same interests they had before the world ended. One of the great ironies of the film is that even though its protagonists are these kind of teenagers, the narrative of the story is about how they have to become adults themselves.
Night of the Comet is such a fun little oddball of a movie. There's gore, there's sex, there's violence, there's suspense. It is so steeped in 80s popular culture, and it's got these two very strong female characters in the sisters. It's everything you want and more, and it's an underseen gem.
Omega Man is based on the same novel as the film The Last Man on Earth and I Am Legend, but it kind of takes its own tactic here. It is showing a world where most of humanity has died except for sort of a handful of mutants. But Omega Man very quickly shows that these mutants are smart, and the fight between them and the last survivor is very real.
You gotta hand it to them, they sure cover their tracks. 2 years. I could just find the nest, find out where they hole up.
Heston just plays a sort of a normal guy hiding in the shadows, trying to survive these vampires, picking them off one at a time until they're almost as afraid of him as he is of them. When it gets remade as I Am Legend, you have a grander, bolder, post-apocalyptic view. If you're going to make a movie where there is one last man standing, they both suited the particular moments that their movies were made in.
Omega Man and I Am Legend are great stories because it is the story of being alone, but the truest form of loneliness. You are the last person on Earth. And this movie asks that question for a good amount of time before it becomes a fun action film.
The writing team of John and Joyce Corrington, who are actually a couple, they came up with the story for the Omega Man. And Joyce Corrington is taking credit for writing Lisa's character as Black. She wanted to incorporate some Black Panther themes in there, and I think the actress Rosalind Cash, she did an amazing job portraying Lisa. Her and Charlton Heston, the hero of the film, they actually kiss as well. They have a relationship, and that wasn't a big thing back then.
I think that Omega Man is actually a utopian vision of what the American man wants to be. You're the last thing left, and you just have yourself and a dog. How successful you can be, and how freeing and liberating and wonderful it is to be this last man against the world. You see struggle, you see pain, you see hardship. It's not as if it is actual utopia, but he's a hero. He's not a victim of the apocalypse.
Bruce McDonald's Pontypool unfolds largely in an environment not unlike the one that you see here, a sort of a collection of recording studios, small-town radio station, and the source of terror is what is happening out there that they can't quite hear yet, and it has to do with the repetition and different sort of permutations of words and language and syllables. This is a very sophisticated concept, and McCaddy, who's a great Canadian character actor. He absolutely holds the thing together.
You know, the French philosopher Roland Barthes once described trauma as a news photo without a caption, and that, folks, is what I think we have here now.
Trauma is a news photo without a caption. This is my favorite line in Pontypool, because it sort of suggests that the apocalypse that we really deserve, the one that we've earned, is the one that's constructed from our own endless chatter and babble and over-reliance on rhetoric.
I think it's really fascinating that the English language is the only language affected by this virus, and Mazzy and Sydney have to speak French in order to not fall victim to this zombie virus.
Our words are corrupted. In the world we live in, where social media has taken over our lives and we're constantly communicating in a language that is built on memes and misinformation, I think it's an incredible metaphor that has only gotten more and more prescient with each passing day. I love how surreal the film gets by the end, where the characters aren't even making sense anymore, and that's their only way to survive this apocalypse. I'm obsessed with this movie.
The movie seems oddly interested in the violences of colonialism, but specifically through language. Things like news are colonizing the minds, making zombies of their audience.
Leave it to this bonkers indie Canadian horror flick to breathe new life into this subgenre. It's just a terribly unique concept on a monster that has been pretty much done to death. It's an underseen Canadian gem, and I really hope it gets its long-awaited sequel one day.
The Quiet Earth is New Zealand's most famous science fiction film, and it's kind of an art house apocalyptic film that is a cult classic.
The Quiet Earth is kind of the perfect New Zealand vision of the apocalypse. Unlike Australia and Mad Max, you're not having anybody kind of rage against the machine. This is more a world where the apocalypse has happened and you're just trying to find a way to cope. And the solution is quite complicated. There's scientific explanations, and there's sort of a borderline supernatural explanation.
Zach Hobson, July 5th. 1. There has been a malfunction in Project Flashlight with devastating results. 2. It seems I am the only person left on Earth.
A lot of The Quiet Earth focuses on the aspect of man playing God and the dangers that come with it. Man using science without really thinking of the ramifications of his actions.
I think one of the most appealing things about the apocalypse genre is that everyone gets to imagine themselves being the survivor. The Quiet Earth is the one film that shows us just how miserable and awful it would be to survive that sort of event. Ultimately, a movie about survivor guilt, and even as more survivors enter into it, there's still hopelessness. There's still a sense that whatever happened was irrevocable, whatever happened will happen again, and the only thing you can do is maybe mitigate that a tiny bit.
All apocalyptic films are about the allocation of resources. And with Reign of Fire, it's really the dragons who have destroyed the environment. They have used up all the humans' resources and then face extinction themselves. It's very much a kind of Plague of Locusts narrative.
It's a good story, especially the bit about the plane, but there hasn't been anything in the air for 20 years. That's their territory.
Dragons are reawoken and re-released into the world and proceed to just eat everything. Food is the scarce resource in Reign of Fire, and as such you see kind of an incredible ash-strewn landscape.
Reign of Fire is kind of a bonkers film because this little kid has access to a construction site where he wakes up a dragon, kind of spawning this dragon takeover of the world. This film really captures like a post-apocalyptic world where there's lo-fi with a bit of medieval look, and the dragons probably take the cake for this.
My favorite scene in Reign of Fire is when the dragon slayers skydive towards these magnificent dragons. And the thing I love the most about that scene is that juxtaposition between something that I think we generally consider dragons to be belonging to the medieval era type aesthetic,
It set the standard for what dragons were going to look like even up until this day. Harry Potter dragons, Game of Thrones dragons, all those dragons based on these dragons. There is just so much baggage that comes along with making a fantasy movie that it is for a very particular audience. And if you can nail the dragons and you can genuinely make them scary, you have your movie.
In the world of Snowpiercer, climate change has gotten so bad that the world is frozen over. All humans need to live aboard a single massive train. The core idea of this film is that civilization is a system, it is on a specific track. You can't break it unless you take it off the rails.
All of humanity is living on a train, the working class is eating cockroaches, the wealthy are eating their eggs, and the idea of kind of social mobility is expressed through physical movement up and down this train carriage.
It's a movie that's about scarcity, it's a movie that's about pollution and environmental devastation. Bong Joon-ho tends to be one of those directors who uses genre very well to comment on larger issues.
One of my favorite details about Snowpiercer is, the heroes have gotten to the middle of the train, they're fighting with a whole bunch of soldiers, and then all of them stop fighting because they've gone around the earth at least once, and then they all stop and shout Happy New Year in the middle of the fight. That is just such an amazing, surreal moment, and it's sort of another sign of how society goes on, when the world has changed so much that we do hang on to certain traditions that are somewhat arbitrary.
From the beginning to the end, Snowpiercer is a riveting experience. My favorite moment in the film is when our heroes are facing off the soldiers who put on night vision goggles and turn off the lights, and the young boy at the back of the train lights that torch. And for some reason, it's a moment that makes me tear up when I see that boy running towards hope. When I think about it, it is just like pure cinema for me. It is the purest form of cinema.
When you tap into performances from Tilda Swinton, Chris Evans, Octavia Spencer, you create this wonderful film that just encapsulates the world. And for me, Bong Joon-ho is the director that can bring that to life in a way that nobody really else can.
I think part of what works so well about that as well is casting Chris Evans, because this was kind of in the middle of his run as Captain America, and he's playing this extremely reluctant hero. So I think for him to come in with this star persona and work so counter to it, it really makes the film hit even harder.
One thing that really interests James Cameron in the Terminator films is what makes somebody human and what can dehumanize them. Is it necessarily a machine that is inhuman, or can people turn that way?
The apocalypse in Terminator is man-made and also the result of artificial intelligence. It's a movie that's thinking way ahead of its time when the original was released in 1984.
The grand horror of these movies is the coming nuclear apocalypse, which is based on Skynet finally achieving a kind of sentience and nuking us all for our own good.
That Terminator is out there. It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop, ever.
I get a lot of flack for saying that Terminator 2 was the first horror movie I'd ever seen, because people say that it's not a horror movie. It's a movie about death machines traveling in time to kill people. Whatever the label, Terminator movies are scary as hell. There's also the existential dread that comes with the idea that one day, and probably not very far from now, machines will gain sentience, and when they do, they'll turn on us.
We take for granted how great these movies are and how good they have been to us since the inception of Terminator and Terminator 2. I think now that we have the horrors of ChatGPT and AI, you start thinking about, oh, here we are. We're in the Terminator movie. We're in the Terminator universe. There are people saying, like very smart people, and they're saying AI is dangerous.
Wim Wenders said he made his apocalypse movie Until the End of the World as kind of a final statement on the road movie. He's famous for these films, and he wanted the ultimate one. So it's kind of like you're traveling across the entire world, which might be blowing up. Wim Wenders said that the power in Until the End of the World really comes from Claire's optimism. A lot of people are falling into excess, a lot of people are falling into sadness, but Claire still thinks that, you know, traveling around, meeting new people, getting into trouble is fun. There's still a reason to keep living.
Wenders touches on many themes in this film, from travel to love, memory, dreams. We see the main characters sort of going through this crisis where they end up escaping into their dreams.
I don't believe this. I haven't seen these people for 14 years. This is my sister-in-law, this is Irina. She's an extraordinary woman.
The world that it builds and the sadness that's in there and the way certain characters are just living with grief and moving forward and trying to recapture a dream that they had. What you get is this weird meditative pop song about being alone and wandering in the world and not knowing what to do with yourself after you've experienced something profound.
This is a film that Wim Wenders had a huge problem making. It's one of his best remembered. It is a bombastic film. It's almost operatic in its scope. And for Wim Wenders, he didn't see this as a science fiction movie. He saw it as a film that takes place 10 years into the future and really shows what was going to happen to civilization.
Wait, The Void? We're talking about The Void? I'm a producer on The Void, so like, I don't know, is this allowed? Is this legal? Can I do this? Is The Void an apocalyptic film? I suppose they do open a portal to hell. I know that when Steven Kostanski and Jeremy Gillespie started out to make The Void, the ambition was to do something in the spirit of Japanese horror video games like Silent Hill, where it kind of spoke to like an existential apocalypse, so to speak. I was always really proud of the final sequence, which is a big homage to Fulci's The Beyond, where the characters find themselves in this literal void with this giant pyramid that maybe speaks to the fact that this is all being conducted by aliens. You know, you don't actually know why it's happening, you're just living through it.
The Canadian collective Astron 6 is dedicated to sort of good blood-spattered genre fun. I think the best thing that they've made is The Void, and that puts it in a great Canadian tradition of lo-fi horror movies. A lot of really talented technicians having fun with just how disgusting and how outlandish and how visceral they can make what the audience is looking at.
The Void showcases a horror and grotesque imagery that comes from the heart and soul of Steve Kostanski. The man is obsessed with Clive Barker and Hellraiser. And we get to deal with just tangible monsters and horrors that just creep us out but also disgust us in a fun way. And The Void, this hell, it's so dope, it's awesome.
I will always have a soft spot for cosmic horror apocalypses, Lovecraftian things where somebody blunders into a problem, fighting something cosmic. You know, everybody thinks they're gonna survive, but they probably won't. This is that kind of movie where he's pretty sure this isn't gonna work out for anybody, but once the stakes are established, you gotta keep pushing.
You people need to wake up.
Or what?
You think you'll stand a chance if there's another one of those things out there?
Any film that has Steven Kostanski at the helm is promising you incredible practical effects and a loving throwback to genre movies of the 80s. The real thrust of the film is in its final set piece, which is like Hellraiser meets Lovecraftian horror, and it has to be seen to be believed.
One of the fun things about the apocalypse in Waterworld is it's so far in the future, we've kind of forgotten about the world we live in now. Waterworld is also kind of an unusually optimistic apocalypse. There's this concept of dry land, this place that exists outside of the water world.
Pure dirt. 3.2 kilos. How'd you come by so much of it?
People in Hollywood have long said, you know, you never make a movie on water, and Waterworld really lived up to all their fears and worries. At the time it was made in 1995, it was the most expensive movie ever made. It was plagued by cost overruns because of the challenges of shooting on water. I think Kevin Costner was on set for something like 157 days.
I don't think it's quite the disaster that it was made out to be at the time. It's also tough to make a case for it being this kind of secret masterpiece, but it is a lot of fun, and it really does take you back to a time where even kind of big budget, mediocre movies looked incredible.
You know, I don't think you're gonna drop that torch, my friend.
Why not?
Because you're not crazy.
My favorite part in Waterworld is when Kevin Costner drops the flare down that tube and there's this old guy that has been clearly living in this horrible engine room for his entire life, and he just goes, oh, thank God. I think that's so funny. It's so mean and cynical that the sweet relief of death is preferable to the existence of living in the movie that is Waterworld.
It's a notorious flop. I think not to its merit. It is a fun, interesting, grand vision of what the world ending can look like. And it's a uniquely hopeful apocalypse. There is this really cool way that the narrative shows that life will go on.
X-Men Days of Future Past is based on one of the most iconic X-Men stories by Claremont and Byrne. It is the story of the great fear, I think, of any minority group, which is, if this math continues, what will our future look like for the X-Men, for the mutants of the Marvel Universe? That looks like concentration camps as they are minoritized by some event in the past.
X-Men Days of Future Past is a film that both manages to be very epic in scope and very personal. It focuses not just on sort of the big world-ending events, it also really focuses on how that boils down between characters.
I didn't kill the president. The bullet curved, Eric, because I was trying to save him. They took me out before I could. Why would you try and save him? Because he was one of us.
Xavier and Magneto, both as leaders, have a very complicated relationship with each other and how they envision the world. And that sort of intimacy between them makes all of those world-ending events so relatable. And I think that is truly a mark of a good apocalypse film.
Concepts of the apocalypse, you would expect them to be catastrophic, but there's a way of looking at the end of the world as a ripening of the soil for new things to grow. This concept of death and rebirth is so typified by the character of the Phoenix in this film, where they take Jean Grey, who had died in the last X-Men film, and is able to re-enter the franchise as a newer, younger version of herself. She has a new lease on life, and the Phoenix narrative was spent and then reinvigorated going forward.
I actually would argue that I think X-Men Days of Future Past is the most ambitious film that has ever been made for comic book films. There's a lot of nuance in a film that talks about looking to the past and considering the consequences of what we do in the past in a way that I don't know if Batman, Superman, the Avengers has really done the same thing. X-Men, of all of the comic books, has always been really great about putting a mirror up to society.
The kids are not all right in 2014's Young Ones. A severe drought has rendered portions of the United States a barren, post-apocalyptic wasteland, and big surprise, that ends up robbing children of their childhood. They're forced to grow up far too early. While primarily being a dystopian film, Young Ones is also a coming-of-age film. It has sci-fi elements. It's a neo-western. It riffs on John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. There's a lot going on here.
The world that Jake Paltrow creates in his film is very baffling. We have this kind of frontier mentality, these frontier tropes, but then you have it paired with this kind of technology around livestock, as well as the mother character who is a paraplegic that can now walk. A lot of what happens in The Young Ones with the scarcity of water is happening today in the developing world, as well as parts of North America. It's a very prescient film that looks at how important resources are and how we're going to fight over that.
I'm thinking I could stick with that supply work. Try and get some of that water down here.
That's not gonna happen. My father tried 100 times. I know.
One of the interesting parts of Young Ones is it shows a lot of great leaps in technology, whether it's robots or medical science, but the fact is the main characters simply cannot afford it. They're washing their dishes in dirt. It does not matter if there's great technology if the average person can't afford it. You're seeing a family of homesteaders who are struggling but surviving, and an evil person kind of comes in and tries to manipulate them. There might be a robot mule, there might be bionic spines, but really at its heart, it's just a Western.
In Zardoz, we're in the year 2293. Procreation is evil, and there's also a giant floating stone head barking orders at people. That giant head, Zardoz, wants to eliminate people because we're polluting the earth. And then there's Zed. He hitches a ride inside of the stone head. He ends up in a world called the Vortex. You're wondering, is this about class? Is this about sexuality? Then when you finally realize that it could be a sci-fi version of The Wizard of Oz, you're thinking, no, but maybe it's anti-war.
Zardoz is almost a replay or a remake or a reimagination of The Wizard of Oz. It's kind of like this game of cultural broken telephone where you're so far in the future that these original texts and their meaning have kind of become disfigured or been made incoherent. It's a movie that has so much kind of psychedelic, psychotronic, campy excess in it, but that's also what John Boorman's very good at. It's ridiculous, but it's ridiculous in the kind of grand and authoritative way that I think 70s sci-fi used to be. I think it's one of the great visions of humanity coming to the end that's ever been put on screen.
Zardoz comments on the hypocrisy of religion, the hypocrisy of the wealthy, and just human nature in general. When Zed lands in the land of the Eternals, this place where they don't age, they don't need to have sex anymore, they live a very peaceful life, the wealthy soon realize that having everything and no challenges doesn't make for a fun life.
We have eternal life, and yet we sentence ourselves to all this drudgery. I tell you, I'm sick of 200 years of washing up. And I'm sick of pitting my bare hands against the blind brute stupidity of nature.
It's weird to see someone like Zed, who is a brute, a rapist, become the savior of this society. And it shows that the line between good and evil is really thin. Zardoz is one of those wild films that is going to require multiple viewings to truly decipher.
Looking at previous apocalyptic films of different generations can be very telling. It shows you what that generation was most terrified of. It shows you what they saw in themselves as hopeful. It's almost like looking at a little time capsule.
When it comes to apocalyptic movies, the major statement seems to be humanity is going to survive no matter what, whether they like it or not. And I think that that will probably continue right up to the end of the actual world.